All right, 2 Samuel 16, let's call this one Gray Areas and subtitle it A Nation Chooses, because much like we talked about the politics that Absalom played in the last chapter, this is going to basically force the entire nation to make a choice. And we're going to see a number of the other characters that are exposed when we make stumbles in life. For the most part, in the last chapter, we got to see the upside, seen a few folks who abandoned David during his time of distress, but mostly getting a chance to see the people who actually stuck by him. One of the names we did not mention, however, is Ahithophel, and he is a trusted counselor, not just of David, but also of his son Absalom, and David is going to lose Ahithophel in this dispute. We'll talk about that later, but before we get to the detailed discussion of Ahithophel, we're going to look at an opportunistic man by the name of Ziba, and we've already seen Ziba as the one David appealed to find out, is there anyone left of Saul's house to whom I can show kindness, especially for Jonathan's sake. He was the one who let him know about Mephibosheth, but now Ziba is going to take this opportunity when David is in distress and under pressure to bring him a gift. But he's also going to bring him a disparaging story about Mephibosheth, and that is going to persuade David to give Ziba all Saul's territory. And so when we are in situations where we have stumbled and we do not necessarily have the luxury of being at our best judgment, we should not be surprised when we likewise have opportunistic people show up as potential friends, but they might be friends who also have an ulterior motive. And the fact that Ziba stands to win huge here is not to be overlooked, especially when we compare him to the people who actually showed loyalty to David to the degree where they left their territory to follow him and give him assistance. Ziba is an individual who used the opportunity to expand his own territory when David was having to flee. And so his self-interest is something you want to probably pay attention to. Likewise, the self-interest in the motives of those who are offering you assistance in your time of need, understanding that Ziba seems to be very similar to a phenomenon we will sometimes see in our modern times, where we have the politically savvy giving to both parties, not being caught up in the emotions of displaying their loyalties or giving their loyalties to anyone, understanding that both come to power. And as I've heard some people say, I do business under both administrations, and so I give to both. And that's not necessarily a pejorative or a bad thing, but understand that here for Ziba, he is potentially playing both ends against the middle, giving a little bit to David in his time of distress in case he still wins, but also keeping his territory in Israel as they wage war against David. So he really is being kind in a way that doesn't require him to commit. So be careful of the opportunistic when you are in desperate situations. Likewise, the opportunistic are not the only problem, because there is a man by the name of Shimei who was bearing a grudge that he was not so comfortable voicing while David was king. But now that David has stumbled and is on the run, that grudge is boiling over into Shimei cursing David and throwing rocks, not only at David, but those who are with him, people who haven't necessarily done anything wrong to Shimei, are going to get caught up in his grudge. And so as David is in a vulnerable position, he is also getting a bird's eye view of people who had grudges against him that they were not comfortable disclosing when he was doing well. So likewise, I think the lesson for us might be obvious when we stumble. Maybe don't be surprised when you start to see concealed grudges come to the surface. And then finally, Ahithophel, probably the most tragic of the three. There are times when our mistakes are going to put unnecessary pressure on our friendships, and understanding that no friend is perfect. And as we've talked about before with David during his time with the Philistines, there are just certain levels of pressure you don't need to put a friendship under. And it was probably wrong for that Philistine king to go so far as to ask David to go to war against Israel, understanding that he was only in Philistine territory under desperate circumstances. And likewise here, we don't get the same benefit of seeing who Ahithophel would have been if David's sin had not potentially implicated him directly, understanding that there are some passages that suggest Ahithophel might have been the grandfather of Bathsheba. And so we do not necessarily know whether Ahithophel was the kind of person who needed to be exposed in David's court, but he is the kind of counselor that we've mentioned before is a casualty of unnecessary conflict. So as we often say, God's best to you as you go forward in him, God willing, discerning genuine friends without losing friends unnecessarily.